Munich did seem the horriblest place, the most desolate place, the most unendurable place.
Those harsh words about Munich were written by one of America's most famous writers, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, better known today as Mark Twain. But why did Twain dislike Munich so much when he first arrived? Why did he nevertheless stay here for several months, and what eventually made him change his mind? That's what we're going to explore in this video. In 1878, Twain set off an extended journey through Europe, traveling through countries including Italy, Germany, France and England. He was 42 years old and already a famous writer, but he wasn't traveling alone. With him were his wife Olivia, known as Livy, his daughters Susie and Clara, their family friend Clara Spaulding, and their children nurse Rosina Hay. After traveling north from Italy, the party finally arrived in Munich at around 7 o'clock in the evening on November 15, 1878. They were exhausted after the long journey, and their first impression of Munich was anything but positive. But that changed remarkably quick.
Munich did seem the horriblest place, the most desolate place, the most unendurable place. And the rooms were so small, the conveniences so meager, and the porcelain stoves so grim, ghastly, dismal, intolerable. So Livy and Clara sat down forlorn and cried, and I retired to a private place to pray. By and by we all retired to our narrow German beds, and when Livy and I finished talking across the room, it was all decided that we would rest 24 hours, then pay whatever damages were required, and straightway fly to the south of France. But you see, that was simply fatigue. Next morning the tribe fell in love with the rooms, with the weather, with Munich, and head over heels in love with Fräulein Dahlweiner. We got a larger parlor, an ample one, threw 2 communicating bedrooms into one for the children, and now we are entirely comfortable. The only apprehension now is that the climate may not be just right for the children, in which case we shall have to go to France, but it will be with the sincerest regret.
Mark Twain stayed here on Karlstraße at number 1A, in Caroline Dahlweiner's boarding house. Today Karlstraße is lined almost entirely with modern office buildings. The building now standing at Karlstraße 1 is also modern. Dahlweiner's boarding house no longer exists, but it was most likely located somewhere around here. One building Twain certainly would have known, however, is the Basilica of St. Boniface, just a few minutes away along Karlstraße. He would likely have passed it on his way to Nymphenburger Straße 45, where he had rented a separate room in which to work.
I have a pleasant workroom, a mile from here, where I do my writing. The walk to and from that place gives me what exercise I need, and all I take.
Unfortunately, that building no longer survives either. The house you see here today was built in 1883, about 4 years after Twain left Munich. Twain's notes and the Munich address book places his workroom here, at Nymphenburger Straße 45, in the home of the Krotz family. And apparently Frau Krotz made sure that even Mark Twain had to live with a certain degree of German orderliness.
I find my rubbish of yesterday all cleaned away and everything in apple pie order. The Frau gives me a good roasting occasionally, and occasionally she freezes me, but in all cases she means well.
Just a few doors down at Nymphenburger Straße 39, there is another house that was already standing in Mark Twain's time. He probably walked past it almost every day. I have no idea whether his shoes were as comfortable as mine though.
Hello?
Do you have problems with your connectivity?
Hello?
Do you want to whip up delicious and nutritious meals in seconds? Do you want to become a lord or lady of Scotland? Giesswein can't help you with any of that, but they do make really good shoes. Lightweight, breathable, made from merino wool by a small family-run business in Tyrol. No magic, no titles. But for long hikes I need comfortable shoes, and they actually deliver. And as a tour guide, I think I know a thing or two about good shoes. If you want to try them, use the code Munich20 for 20% off. Links in the description. Mark Twain wrote parts of A Tramp Abroad while living in Munich. In the book, he also describes how he took part in the city's cultural life. He attended concerts and the opera, and was particularly impressed by the discipline of Munich audiences.
I was at a concert in Munich one night. The people were streaming in. The clock hand pointed to 7. The music struck up, and instantly all movement in the body of the house ceased. Nobody was standing, or walking up the aisles, or fumbling with a seat. The stream of incomers had suddenly dried up at its source. I listened undisturbed to a piece of music that was 15 minutes long, always expecting some tardy ticket holders to come crowding past my knees, and being continuously and pleasantly disappointed. But when the last note was struck, here came the stream again. You see, they had made those late-comers wait in the comfortable waiting parlor from the time the music had begun until it was ended.
Twain visited Munich during the reign of King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the man we know today as the fairy tale king. And Twain also had something to say about Ludwig's rather eccentric relationship with the opera. He recounts a remarkable story he had heard about one of the king's private performances.
The King of Bavaria is a poet and has a poet's eccentricities, with the advantage over all other poets of being able to gratify them no matter what form they may take. He is fond of opera, but not fond of sitting in the presence of an audience. Therefore, it has sometimes occurred in Munich that when an opera has been concluded and the players were getting off their paint and finery, a command has come to them to get their paint and finery on again. Presently the king would arrive, solitary and alone, and the players would begin at the beginning and do the entire opera over again with only that one individual in the vast, solemn theater for audience. Once he took an odd freak into his head. High up and out of sight, over the prodigious stage of the court theater is a maze of interlacing water pipes, so pierced that in case of fire innumerable little thread-like streams of water can be caused to descend, and in case of need this discharge can be augmented to a pouring flood. American managers might want to make a note of that. The king was sole audience. The opera proceeded. It was a piece with a storm in it. The mimic thunder began to mutter, the mimic wind began to wail and sough, and the mimic rain to patter. The king's interest rose higher and higher. It developed into enthusiasm. He cried out,
"It is very, very good indeed, but I will have real rain. Turn on the water."
The manager pleaded for a reversal of the command, said it would ruin the costly scenery and the splendid costumes. But the king cried,
No matter, I will have real rain. Turn on the water."
So the real rain was turned on and began to descend in gossamer lances to the mimic flower beds and gravel walks of the stage. The richly dressed actresses and actors tripped about singing bravely and pretending not to mind it. The king was delighted. His enthusiasm grew higher. He cried out,
"Bravo, bravo! More thunder, more lightning. Turn on more rain."
The thunder boomed, the lightning glared, the storm winds raged, the deluge poured down. The mimic royalty on the stage, with their soaked satins clinging to their bodies, slopped about ankle-deep in water, warbling their sweetest and best. The fiddlers under the eaves of the stage soared away for dear life, with the cold overflow spouting down the backs of their necks. And the dry and happy king sat in his lofty box and wore his gloves to ribbons applauding.
"More yet!"
cried the king.
"More yet! Let loose all the thunder, turn on all the water. I will hang the man that raises an umbrella."
When this most tremendous and effective storm that had ever been produced in any theater was at last over, the king's approbation was measureless. He cried,
"Magnificent, magnificent, encore, do it again."
But the manager succeeded in persuading him to recall the encore, and said the company would feel sufficiently rewarded and complimented in the mere fact that the encore was desired by His Majesty, without fatiguing him with a repetition to gratify their own vanity.
Mark Twain has now unexpectedly brought me to another place in Munich that I have already covered in a separate video, the Old South Cemetery.
One day, during a ramble about the city, I visited one of the 2 establishments where the government keeps and watches corpses until the doctors decide that they are permanently dead and not in a trance state. It was a grisly place, that spacious room. There were 36 corpses of adults in sight, stretched on their backs on slightly slanted boards, in 3 long rows, all of them with wax-white, rigid faces, and all of them wrapped in white shrouds. Along the sides of the room were deep alcoves, like bay windows, and in each of these lay several marble-visaged babes, utterly hidden and buried under banks of fresh flowers, all but their faces and crossed hands. Around a finger of each of these 50 still forms, both great and small, was a ring, and from the ring a wire led to the ceiling, and thence to a bell in a watchroom yonder, where day and night a watchman sits always alert and ready to spring to the aid of any of that pallid company who, waking out of death, shall make a movement for any, even the slightest movement, will twitch the wire and ring that fearful bell.
Twain's notebook makes the location much clearer. On January 4, 1879, he noted that he had gone to the Großen Kirchhof and seen 15 or 20 dead. The editors identify this as Munich's South Cemetery. A mortuary had been built here in the early 19th century, and the former consecration hall survives today as lapidarium. We cannot be certain that this was the place Twain visited, but it's a very plausible candidate. Twain later used his visit to a mortuary as a starting point for a much more elaborate story in Life on the Mississippi, in a chapter called A Thumbprint and What Came of It. In it, he meets a former night watchman named Karl Ritter, whose story eventually leads us back to this very kind of mortuary with a rather macabre twist. But Mark Twain also discovered some of Munich's more charming sides. In a chapter that was ultimately omitted from A Tramp Abroad, he wrote about Munich's Schäffler tradition. Unfortunately, no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find the original English version of this omitted chapter. So I decided to translate the German version back into English. Dear Mark Twain fans, please forgive me for this sacrilege.
On the roughly mile-long walk to my workroom, I saw a group of a little over 20 young men giving a public performance which aroused my utmost curiosity. It was January 9th. When I reached my workroom, I asked my German landlady about them. She said they were the Schäffler.
According to legend, in 1517 the Schäffler helped lift the spirits of the people of Munich after a devastating plague by taking to the streets and dancing. The tradition continues to this day, with a Schäffler performing every 7 years. If you'd like to learn more about it, you can check out my video which I filmed during the most recent Schäffler Dance in early 2026. Twain was particularly amused by the antics of one of the harlequins.
At intervals he struck grotesque poses, made grimaces, stole a kiss from one of the enthusiastic ladies or young girls in the crowd, or gave someone a quick tap on the shoulders with his jester's staff. His antics were received with delight, applause, and laughter. What they do would delight and interest any stranger, but what their performance means to the people of Munich, who know and love the old tradition, no stranger can estimate or ever hope to fully understand. In January 1886, the Schäffler will once again make their rounds through the streets of Munich, and may I be there to see them.
Twain did not make it back to Munich for the next Schäffler Dance in 1886, but he did return to the city many years later, in the summer of 1893, when he and his family spent a few weeks here. This video took quite a bit more research than usual, and it also cost me a little money. So if you enjoy videos like this, feel free to leave a small tip in my digital tip jar. And of course, even better, come to Munich and book a tour with me. Maybe my Weißwurst tour, which ends at the Isar Tor, or perhaps even a Mark Twain tour. Anything is possible. You'll find all the links in the description. See you in the next video, Philip.